Just about, or midday everybody. I'm Liz Gowler, and it's an incredible privilege to be here and speaking to you. I was going to move this out of the way because I felt a bit sort of cut off and restricted, but then I realised I couldn't quite handle all bits of technology, so that's, I might actually move this. I don't know better, and I don't feel quite so cut off anymore. And I apologise. Usually apologise for what I'd like to apologise for, but it's that I've got slides because I don't think, actually, they're not really necessary. I'm probably talking without them. But I've written them anyway. What I'm apologising about them for is that they've got a cheap logo at the bottom, which I ought to have been able to get off, and I wasted quite a lot of time yesterday trying to remove it. I put it on, but I think it's a different programme, and I can't get it off. But anyway, so please ignore what that says down there, although that is where I work. But I have many other facets. So anyway, thank you very much. And what I was asked to talk about was sustainable and just food, particularly on the international perspective. But I think it's quite hard, as we've already heard, to talk about food in an international way without also talking about our food, because we are part of very powerful international global food systems. So that's partly what I'm going to try and address at some speed. And I'll perhaps skip over some things that I think are not going to be interesting or really able to tell. Yes, if you can carry on. And the question that I partly discussed with Richard when we spoke before Christmas was about how should we eat. So I'm going to, please, cover three aspects. One is a phrase which Jeff Tansey used when he was giving a lecture on food ethics this week and will be using again next week, which is essentially the world comes to us on a plate. And we've been thinking about abundance and its good senses. Whether or not this is a good sense is something we might want to kind of think about a bit more. But I'll just say something very quickly about why food and diets thought to matter so much, and a little tiny bit about what the food system is like and who wins and who loses. And then I want to spend some time thinking about why is there a panic on about food, because I think it's not insignificant that this meeting is happening. It's one of many fantastic, I think somebody said this earlier, and I've forgotten who it was, that food is the sort of thing, the lens through which you could look at almost everything about every society ever. And yet, curiously, it's not there in most university departments, schools, training colleges and so on, except in practical skills, and even those are disappearing, those courses. More's the pity. I know I'm a public health nutritionist who works on social and policy aspects of food, and I've always found it very hard to get a job. And that may be just because I'm not very good at what I do, but I think it's also because there are not many jobs out there to apply for, which is a very odd state of affairs. Not to give me a job, but I mean the fact that food is so important, but it's peripheral. And as I think it was Alan Berg certainly said it when he was the director of nutrition at the World Bank many years ago, but he's not the only person who said this. And he was talking about malnutrition, but the same applies to food. It's everybody's business and nobody's responsibility. And I think what's interesting in the last year or so is that it has suddenly become the responsibility of lots of people. I think there is a bit of a panic on it, so I'm not going to say something about that, but we've already covered quite a lot of it, thank you. And then move on to talk about what might justice for all look like. And I'm going to finish a little bit about what can we do, because as I understood it, that's part of what we were thinking about today, not just the big global pictures, but how can we make a difference as individuals. Okay, so just starting with food and diet, why does it matter? We know, of course, that it's essential for health and well-being. My picture doesn't have people in it, this one, sorry about that. But as a nutritionist, as a public health person, I'm very aware of all the kinds of concern, massive amount of research. This is where much of the research money goes into, some would almost say obsessively, into the components of food and their contribution to what you might call the biomedical model of health. The body is a machine, making sure it works properly. So making sure that we don't eat too much of some things, saturated fat in particular, sugar and salt, and that we eat enough of vitamins and minerals. And that's quite appropriate. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that's not the only contribution of food to health and well-being. There's also now more, I think, research, sort of published academic research, and also a lot more interest in actually what we've been talking about a bit is how people eat, the patterns of eating, the different sorts of meal patterns. As you probably know, quite a lot of emphasis now on fruit and vegetables, 5 a day, being widely promoted and so forth. There's quite a lot of interest now, if you like, the other side of it, which is moving about more, and the consequences for problems in both of those, which is obesity, but which is very often still seen as an individual's problem. It's people who get fat, it's me who gets fat, not society. But actually, maybe the reasons I get fat are not just to do with my intransigence, fecklessness, general kind of bloody-mindedness. I'm not to use that word here, something dropped from the sky. It's probably not to be blasphemous, I apologise. But anyway, but that maybe obesity, along as a sort of another measure of dysfunctionality within the food system, like malnutrition, it is a version of malnutrition, is a symptom of the problem of the structure as much as individual choice. And there's a lot more research now, certainly in terms of inequalities in health, in looking at how that pans out across the life course, the cumulative effects of being poorly nourished in your mother's womb, because your mother's not very well nourished, and then, or perhaps smokes a lot or takes drugs, and the cumulative effects through childhood, adolescence, etc., all through adulthood into old age. And some of that's working out into food. But as we know, and as we've said, food is essential for our social, economic and emotional well-being. It's who we are, what we value. And I think that's been epitomised, what was being said here earlier. I was very struck by your opening remarks. You talked about both being sick and that experience of not being able to eat, but that actually one of the things that you value now is being part of a community where food is celebrated and communal. And I'm a member of the Iona community, which is an ecumenical, dispersed community of women and men living in different parts of the world. When we meet together in our sort of local family group, as it were, we always eat together, and it's bring and share. And when you meet people in Iona, one of the joys, isn't it, is of chopping vegetables and washing up. And the onions are a delight, especially if you're last to go and chop, because you always get the onions. But anyway, but eating together is a very important part of that community life, and that's true, I think, in many, many communities, and it's not an accident. And we've already talked about hospitality and the effects that has. So, going on from there, just to bring in a bit of kind of theorising, thank you. And I'm very grateful to Jeff Tansey for this, who has written, I'm going to plug some books, none of which is mine, and I'm getting money for this one, because I suppose they're my mates, but apart from that. This is a book which has been around for quite a while now, published by AdScan, by Jeff Tansey and Tony Worsley, The Food System, a Guide, and it's still one of the best accounts of the kind of contemporary food system, although the examples are not completely up to date because it was published in '95. One of the things that Jeff points out is from Max Neef, Manfred Max Neef from Latin America, is he talks about these 9 fundamental human needs for subsistence, protection, affection, understanding, participation, creation, recreation, identity and freedom. And food and shelter are only satisfiers of those things. They don't actually, they are not the needs themselves. We talk about basic needs, the food and shelter and so on, but actually probably they're not. They are the things that meet those other needs. And what he says is our 4 core needs, I'm sorry, this is slipping off a bit, I've got the slides outside on the line or something, it says 4 core needs, are being, having, doing and interacting. And we have to look at how the food system enables those things to happen. So that means, to me, as a public health nutritionist who's taught public health nutrition for 20 odd years at a big postgraduate school in London and so on, so I'm kind of very versed in all this stuff. Nevertheless, what I believe very passionately is that the social, cultural, economic and the nutritional aspects of food are all important. And they must be met in ways which fulfil rather than violate other people's needs. And that's where we're going so very wrong. The food system doesn't do that, by and large. These are not just idealistic, these are the fundamentals. And the food system now, as we've been hearing about already, it's pretty little, in the late 20th, 21st century, if you like, is a huge success on many grounds. It's a highly globalised system, it's incredibly efficient, there's a great concentration of ownership, both production, processing, retailing and marketing. It's about a handful of companies control much of that, a great deal of vertical structuring and integration, lots of very clever extremely economically efficient control systems in place, which means that food is safe. We can pop into Sainsbury's almost any hour of the day or night and get more or less anything we need. And so can many, many other people all over the world. And there's never been a period when that's been true. So it's a huge success. Lots of increased productivity. That's why we now feed 6 million, whereas at the World Food Crisis Summit in 1974, there were anxieties about whether we would feed 3.5, 4 million. So that, I think, is the kind of the thinking behind we've got to go into a step, what's a step change, up the gear to feed 9 million, which is what we're going to have in 2050 on some reckonings. And we have this huge range of products now and very sophisticated processes. I spend my life at the moment teaching undergraduates politics of food and nutrition. I'm trying to get them to be social scientists, which is quite a challenge for somebody brought up in public health. But anyway, trying to get them to sort of critique a system which looks so, on the surface, so glorious, and into which they are all completely unthinkingly born, as it were, and wherever they come from in the world, they're completely used to it. And don't even think about it. And I hear them saying, my goodness, I've just read that Felicity Lawrence's book, maybe not on the label, the earlier one, this is her later one, Eat Your Heart Out, chapters on different commodities, and they say, I'm never going to buy a bag of salads again. Do you see what they do to bread? And so on and so on. I find myself thinking, these are intelligent people. Why did they not know this before? Why do they have to come to a course and a degree, in a fancy university to learn this stuff? This is, it's not rocket science, it's hidden. Why don't we know about these things? But we don't, because we are all bought into this huge success story, which is a very powerful success story. More people are fed better than have ever been fed before. We've just been hearing about the problems in the past. And those are solved in one version. Okay. Lots of use of information technology right the way through, and through that, partly, and by other means, incredible moulding of consumer tastes, as we've already been saying. Perhaps I won't spell on that, dwell on that too much. But just to point out, and again, this is one of Jeff Tansi's great lines, consumption is all, economic consumption and food consumption. We can only eat so much food. Some of us probably eat rather more calories than might be good for us, given the amount of running about we do, running upstairs or whatever it is, working in the fields, etc. Nevertheless, even so, even if we're all eating 3,500 calories and we should be eating 2,500 calories, that's not going to do it for the food system. The food system has to get us to buy more and more and more, different products, different this, different that. It's all about getting people to buy new things. I could go on about that for a long time, but I won't. And I think one of the other things that's happened, and again, I'm not by any means the only person arguing this, is the role of the state. It's been really interesting, the comments about the state that we had earlier, and how important the obligation the state has to feed its citizens, and possibly people who are not citizens too. But you could argue, and to some extent, that the state has been residualised. The role of the state now is regulation, making sure food's safe, making sure the labels are true, making sure the labels are there, etc., etc. And even the food system, people in the food industry would say they do a lot of that, and the state just sort of tries to catch up. And it's not just the British state, it's not just what happens in Westminster, it's also, of course, what happens in Europe, and it's what happens at the World Trade Organization, WTO. So the levels of regulation are very variable. And I would argue inequality is built into the system. It's predicated on it. We have cheap food. We have cheap food both in terms of its cost to us, what we have to pay for it in Sainsbury's down the road, and we also have cheap food in terms of our notion of its ecological footprint. And that is because we offshore all the costs elsewhere. Other people are bearing those costs. And that's very hard for us to, as individuals, to change. And any government that said, actually, our election vote-winning line is food's going to cost more. People are going to really like that, aren't they? They'll flock, you can see. But it's built in from production. The food system is predicated on cheap oil, cheap water, and cheap labour, some of which are under threat, of course. And actually, I would often argue it's built in is that there are going to be low-income consumers, and therefore any attempt to talk about quality in the food system other than just for middle-class consumers, it's amazing how quickly the conversation goes around to we have to keep cheap food because of poor consumers. Well, maybe we could do something about poor consumers. Anyway, Now, I said the food has become a kind of issue, and in Britain that's no exception. 2 years ago, the Office of the Prime Minister Strategy Unit had a group set up to look at food in Britain. This is from their analysis of the issues, which came out 2 years ago, actually. It's in January 2008. It's an excellent report. You can still download it. And this is just an example of some of the stuff that I was talking about, and it's come from the Institute of Grocery Distribution, reproduced in that report, food analysis of the issues. So there on the left just shows you how consolidated the grocery market has become over the last decade, really. And the multiples are the dark blues, and you can see that in the 1990s they had quite a small share, UK market share, and by 2010 they had a very high market share, and that's about 4 or 5 companies. And I'm sure most people here are very familiar with this, but it's still nevertheless, still actually quite shocks me when I see it, talking and writing about it. And we have, and this one on the right, can you see it, is the UK grocery market, relatively highly concentrated compared with European neighbours. Some would be more concentrated. But actually, even in the European neighbours, even in the Czech Republic, it's about 50%. So it's pretty universal. And just as another example, this is a British example, but I put this up because I think it's really quite interesting. One of the features of late 20th and 21st century is we eat out more in Britain. That's one of the things that's gone back a bit with the recession and prices rising. Not a lot. I debated whether to put the bar graph in, because the bar graph shows you that about, I've forgotten the percentage now, I think it's about 40% of our eating out is in fast food. But in this pie chart, it's split into all the different ones. But if you add up this 1%, 4%, 4%, so on, you come to quite a large percent, and it's bigger than pub catering, which at the moment is the biggest outdoor source. Some pub catering is very good. Some of it is dismal. Quite a lot of it is from high in all the things it's not supposed to be, and low in the things that it is supposed to be. So I think this is really quite a sort of telling graph, and this is by sales actually. So that's something to do with the picture. There's another point I was going to make about poverty, but I'll come back to that later. Where does our food come from? Well, it comes from all over the world. I haven't got a graph that shows you all the sources, because there isn't one. It's a straightforward one. It's too complicated a picture. This is the food. These are data from DEFRA, from their Food Statistics Pocketbook, which comes out on a regular basis. I think these are the 2007 figures, actually. But I took it from that same report, Food Analysis of the Issues. And what is usually said is about 60% of our food is grown in Britain. I'm surprised it's as high as that, but apparently this is the case. That DEFRA is supposed to know. That's the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. But the biggest gap between what we consume and what we eat is in fruit, and particularly fruit and veg, as you can see on the far left there. And this graph is not showing you the gap between imports and consumption. It's showing you the gap between imports and exports. And they also, the claim is also that quite a lot of what we import from Europe rather than from elsewhere. And the reason I mention that is that we do put the world on our plate. And of course, that it depends on whether you're measuring by value or by volume, because some of the things we import are light and small, like spices. And of course, we import coffee and tea and bananas and many, many fruits. But actually, what is quite interesting in the most recent report, the most recent statement about government food policy, which came out at the same time as the Wellington speech at the Oxford Food and Farming Conference about 3 weeks ago, but the DEFRA launched the food policy as well. And interestingly, it links, it is claimed there's a very strong link with DFID, with the Department for International Development, because our imports are very much, particularly fruits and vegetables, are seen as very much part of our trade relationship, which is tied into our aid relationship and tied into enabling so-called developing countries, the global south, to raise their GNP and to earn more foreign exchange. And certainly there are people, for example, in the IIED, the International Institute for Environment and Development, Bill Hawley there, and Patrick Mulvey in Practical Action, both argue very strongly that we should not argue to reduce our imports of fruits and vegetables. That, buying beans from Kenya is not necessarily a bad thing, because that's giving very good welfare attention to people there. You still have to ask, is it? Sure, that's true in principle. How does it work in practice? So, if we wanted then to say, that's a bit of whistle-stop tour through what the current global food system looks like, lots of things I've missed out, and I hope others are going to pick up and say more. If you want to say who wins, who loses, well, I've just said there are more people fared better all year round. Certainly in my lifetime, I can remember seasonal tomatoes and so forth. I don't think about buying tomatoes any time of year. In fact, I keep realising I'm very old-fashioned because I still think of strawberries as seasonal. Getting old. And as I say, food is relatively cheap in the global north and to some extent in the south too, varying. And it's safe. People on the whole are not dying of food poisoning. That's been one of the great so-called successes, which is so important. It's very widely available, with a lot of debate about how much of it's healthy, particularly through the promotion of new products and so forth. But, and I've just listed here, off the top of my head, obvious problems. There are very harsh terms of trade for most suppliers. Much production is lost through all kinds of production losses. I mean, you started off with a quote from Mugabe about Zimbabwe that so much of African production has been lost, and lost 30%. It's true. It's lost to rats and pests and storage losses, etc., etc. I guess rats have to too. But anyway, but potentially there is a big loss there, and a lot of government attention goes to that. I've paired that with the fact that so much grain production and soybean production goes to animal feed. And this is not to be anti-carnivores. I'm a meat eater myself, particularly meat bought from the farmers' market in Headington. I don't eat as much meat as I did, or as much fish as I did, because I'm conscious of that kind of contradiction, that difficult issue about meat and fish, probably. We'll talk about that later. Some people would argue that the amount that we produce in order to feed animals is questionable and is a moral issue that we should be considering, particularly to produce meat cheaply. But then patterns of diet are changing around the world, particularly in the global south, so-called. China and India, there's a huge demand for meat rising, so that has to be met somehow. So I don't think there's a clear-cut moral yes or no there, good, bad. We've had meat for years, and who's us to say to other people, no, you've got to be vegetarian, or not have meat very often, or only rich people can have meat. These are not straightforward stories. Quite apart, and that's to do with how we feed the animals, how we rear the animals, and how they are on the welfare, and also climate change, of course, because as I'm sure most of you know that ruminants fart, and this is not good. Another word I'm supposed to say these words here, but anyway, there's probably a fancier way of explaining it, but they contribute to greenhouse gases, and that's one of the big anxieties. Okay, there's a lot. Those things are probably relatively familiar. What I have only much more recently come around to understanding more about, and this is largely through the work of NGOs like ActionAid and others too who are here. I know. So again, I won't say much about this. There are many countries where labour law either doesn't exist or it's regularly ignored, and I'm afraid that's true in the food industry as much as it is in the garment industry, hence fair trade and so forth, but even so. And what is the case is that a great deal of food in the world is grown by women, increasingly in casualised labour forces. Which means they have a lot of insecurity, job insecurity, as well as other kinds of insecurity, of violence and so forth. And women are often, of course, responsible too for looking after a number of dependents, both children and older people, perhaps, and sometimes these are grandmothers who are looking after the next generation on. Because men have gone away for work or have died or disappeared, or were never there, apart from presumably conception. But anyway. But there is a huge issue about labour and the risk to labour, which is one of the big factors in the fact that there's probably still about 1 billion hungry, there's about 1 billion obese, and difficult to calculate, but large numbers malnourished, which we've heard about, and what you can get from the UN organisations, or you can also get from the NGOs. And I think it's also the case, this is argued very strongly by a number of people, that although there's not so much poisoning from food, there are other elements of ill health, including obesity and type 2 diabetes and all kinds of other conditions that come from our food and because of the way it's produced and marketed. And what we're seeing more and more widely is all gloom stuff, isn't it? There's a loss of biodiversity, huge environmental footprints. Our food casts a very long shadow, and a great loss of skills. De-skilling within the food sector is quite powerful, quite important. Here are just 3 examples taken from different web pages. So from Christian Aid on the left, a story about a tomato farm and the problems there of people in West Africa, particularly Ghana, who used to grow, and this is something that I know Christian Aid has been campaigning about for some time, and not just then, but that's where I've come across it. That food is imported from Europe and from the States more cheaply than it can be grown in Ghana. That's something to do with the way the food system works. And not just the food system, but in cahoots, some would argue, with the big international loan system. So in return for loans and aid from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, the Ghanaian government has had to open up its markets to foreign foods which are heavily subsidised by their governments. And so here's somebody who can no longer grow there. Sorry, the picture seems to have come twice, I'm not quite sure why. This is a slightly more positive story, this version from Practical Action, talking about the work they've done on seed fairs to try and maintain and sustain biodiversity. So here's a family in northern Kenya who, when the rains failed very dramatically, which they have been doing a lot in northern Kenya recently, they didn't go into destitution, but were able to survive just about through this annual seed fair exchange. And then in Oxfam, this I know because I'm a long-term supporter, so I've been getting letters about this too, and emails, that there is an ongoing crisis at the moment in East Africa because of drought and the failing of agriculture and of pastoralism. Not much in the news, I don't think. I might not have known that was going on in East Africa. So we're not terribly conscious of what these ongoing and pretty widespread issues are. Nevertheless, as I indicated at the beginning, there is a bit of about food. And we heard some of that expressed earlier, that there is likely to be a doubling in demand for food over the next 25 to 50 years, partly because of more people, partly because the people who are there want to eat differently. Those who are poorest in the world and those who are no longer the poorest and aspiring middle class and actual middle class are not prepared to continue to eat very basic, just cereals. They want to eat like all of us. And that puts a demand on the system, so how to deal with it. And this is more straight from Wellington, actually. Agriculture's got to keep pace, and it's got to keep pace in a way which provides food, yes, but also, and I think he does say this actually in some other places, but not always, because he's writing more about science usually. It certainly has to keep pace in order to promote economic growth in different countries, but it has to keep pace in order to protect people's livelihoods. Farmers grow, sure, to eat, but they also grow because it's their living. Anybody in the room who's a farmer or has connected with farming will know that's the case. And that's a perfectly legitimate reason to grow. There's nothing bizarre or immoral about that at all. It's absolutely fundamental. And that should be one of the driving forces of a food system that enables people to retain livelihoods and to stay on the land. That's something that Colin Tudge argues quite a lot in his book here, for a new kind of agriculture. And of course it has to meet standards of food safety and good public health and sustainability, both environmental and social. And the problems that are being faced are the things I've already talked about. So there's loss of biodiversity, this has been documented more and more. There's a loss of arable land in many, many places. And a big drain of labour. Anybody with any sense gets out of agriculture or horticulture. The average age of farmers in Britain, the DEFRA keeps on saying, well actually they used to say it's 57, and now saying it's 59. And I don't think it's like Radio 4, that people start listening as you get older or become farmers as they get older. I think what it's saying is, by and large, anybody with any kind of now sort of sense gets out of farming, and there are people moving back in, but I'm not saying that's an appropriate response, I'm just describing what is happening. And if the average age is 59, you know what averages are. I mean, that means there's a spread, and I'm sorry. I think increasingly what we're going to see is conflict over water. And you'll be familiar with the oil conflicts and oil crises, but actually I don't think we've seen anything. I think water is going to produce much more. Bronwyn Morgan, who used to be here in Oxford, now in Bristol, writes, she's a lawyer, and works in and writes about and campaigns within water conflicts and different ways in which different parts of the world, conflict over access to water is going to come to the fore and is being resolved or not resolved, water privatisation, all of that, and the pollution of water and the non, such water as there is no longer viable to be used for drinking and so on. There's going to be more and more anxieties about land. We already have quite an ongoing debate within Britain about land use, but internationally, globally, there's a number of reports coming out about the so-called land grabs of different countries buying up land in different parts of the world in order to feed their own populations. The Middle East are doing this, China's doing it, Britain's done it for years, of course, that's what colonisation was about. We're also being grabbed. There's a big new fruit and vegetable centre down in Margate called Planet Earth. It's a sort of amazing production, industrialised production of vegetables, like that kind of thing. And it's done with Dutch money and Dutch skill and Dutch promotion. So nobody's described that as a land grab, but I think that you could certainly make a case for it. Anyway, and of course climate change. And this is just I'm going to show a couple of slides out of the report, which again came out in 2008, which is kind of watershed year for these reports. The International Assessment of Agriculture, Science and Technology for Development. Trips off the tongue, doesn't it? That was the Iceland report. That was chaired by Bob Watson, who at the time had been working in the World Bank. He's a British academic, he was formerly at the University of East Anglia, and he's now the chief scientist at DEFRA. I think he's fantastic. I just Googled partisan here. Anyway, and he works in Wellington too, of course. But in the ICESAT report, they looked at a number of issues, and this is just one example of a proportion of water which was withdrawn for agricultural use over the last, well, this is 10 years ago. And you can see how 75 to 90% of water in Australia, the Dark Red, and Madagascar, and some parts of the world, and over 75 in the orange has been withdrawn for agriculture. This was 10 years ago, so it's getting worse. And there's this rather sort of scary, complicated diagram there, which is an attempt to map out what will happen to food, water, ecosystems, with global temperature change relative to pre-industrial. As you know, Copenhagen is trying to keep us down to 2, we're probably going to go to 4, and some argue we're on the way to 6 already. And just draw attention to these two at the bottom, actually, which is extreme weather events. And I think we've seen that in Britain, and I know farmers have been really hit by sudden floods, or droughts, or frosts, or snow, etc., etc. That's going to be multiplied, probably much worse in the tropics, and some of these will be irreversible changes. I mentioned the food strategy report. This is the actual, what I've been showing you, so the analytical report came out in January 2008. In July 2008, the actual report came out, and it was all still on the web, and they're very interesting reports. I don't endorse everything that's in it. I think they're very weak on inequalities and poverty, but nevertheless, it's a fantastic source of information and clarity about the system, and I think recognises complexity and puts food complexity actually kind of on the agenda in a big way. But just to give an example, on the left-hand side, this is to do with climate change and so on. This is the food chain contributions towards UK greenhouse gases. Probably if I'd asked around the room, which you were pretty clued up with people, and I would rank myself, but I thought the critical issue was flying food, food miles, that's what people often talk about, but it's not its production, it's agriculture, fisheries, that's 54%. There is some effect from transport, but actually if you look at the transport, international air transport's only 2.6, it's not a very convincing pie chart, so I didn't translate it very well. Sorry, that's a million tonnes. The international air transport is not a large part of our transport version. It's very interesting, isn't it, how the food industry gets everywhere. the hauliers have managed to crash the system, so you can't live it. What I was going to say was that one of the biggest contributions to food transport greenhouse gases is us driving to shops. It's consumer travel. And some of the best research on all of this, pulling it all together, I'll just show you a couple of things. I might show you some more in a minute, is from the Food Climate Research Network based at the University of Surrey, which is led by an amazing, energetic, coherent and lucid woman called Tara Garnett. And you can sign up for regular emails if you haven't done so already, you're interested in this. She produced a report, again 2008, called Cooking Up a Storm, looking at the relationship between food and climate change. And it's important because it's not just a bad story. It's not just, oh my gosh, food is terrible, look how all this is going to wreck the environment. It's also talking about the potential of the food system to mitigate climate change, because we lock up a lot of carbon in land in all kinds of ways. So the way we use land is critical to addressing climate change as well as contributing to the problems. Have you got it plugged in?
Back up.
Yeah. It says, have you got it plugged in?
Just back on.
Oh, okay. So we're on this one. 15. You take my word for the proportion of stuff from people driving to shops. So this is Tara's actually on the slide rather than that. So if you, that's it. And the next one. Okay. So there's the report, Cooking Up a Storm, Food Greenhouse Gas Emissions and Our Changing Climate, really very cogent summary. So one of the reasons why there's a panic about food is because of climate change, both because it's making food production worse, because food production is making climate change worse, and because there's huge potential to improve climate change. That's by the way we manage land and that which is on it, and how we process and so forth. Other reasons for panics are what we were hearing about before, about price. So here's food prices are very sensitive to oil prices, and this is looking at what the recent price changes have been. So the effect depends quite a lot on the commodities, but it also follows the oil price. And as we heard just before, coffee has led to social unrest in a number of places. And it's one of the reasons why the G8 meeting suddenly got very interested in food and had to stop this, and we can't have food price rises that are significant. Food prices have gone up in Britain too, not yet causing rioting in the streets, but it's certainly causing a lot of unrest, partly because it changes the retail price index and that figures in wage claims, many things, but also because our benefit system, our welfare benefit system, is predicated, this is a point I forgot to make earlier, it's predicated on a very materialist, minimalist version of nutrition and health. And if food prices, and also on very basic food prices, and if food prices go up, income support, job seekers allowance, etc., old age pensions are already not enough for people to eat healthily for a long time. They will be even less enough. So it has that kind of knock-on political effect. So, and I've already said most of these things, so perhaps I'll move on. Actually, one of the, just to highlight the third bullet, big bullet down, food prices, a lot of people have written about why food prices went up as much as they did a couple of years ago, and there's only a little bit of work being done, partly through ActionAid, partly Larry Elliott in The Guardian's been writing about this. It wasn't just to do with the rise in oil prices, etc., and global demand for meat. At one stage it was all being blamed on the middle classes in India. Also because with the collapse in the hedge fund market, speculators needed something to bet on, and they started betting on cereal prices. And at least that's the line. I mean, it's not yet fully proven, but there's been a couple of very interesting papers. There's one produced from Chatham House looking at exactly that and speculation. And okay, so there's a lot of. I was going to say something about the nature of the answers and inequalities, some of which we talked about before. So We move on then to say that the ways in which people have framed this has been, and particularly in the G8, picked up by the Food and Agriculture Organisation specifically, of course, is what we're set up to do, is to go back to and revisit and push on this very traditional definition of food security, which is certainly one that DEFRA uses and I use myself all the time. It's a situation that exists, as one version, there are lots of different definitions, but this will do. The situation exists when all people at all times have physical, social, economic access to sufficient, safe, nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food purposes for an active and healthy life. It sounds great. There's absolutely nothing in that about justice or who makes any decisions or how this is to be done. It can be done high-tech, low-tech, etc., etc. And what is very interesting is that there are other movements coming along, one of which is very strong has come from the NGO and civil society organisation movements, which is food sovereignty, which looks very similar, but it actually transforms the way of thinking. It's the right of peoples, communities and countries to define their own labour, agricultural, fishing, food and land policies, which are ecologically, socially, economically and culturally appropriate to their circumstances. It's the true right to food which is meeting physical, social, economic access, blah, 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 blah. And to food, but no, sorry, this sum that out in my space, but it's the same kind of principle. And to food producing resources and the ability to sustain themselves and their societies. And that's a very different notion of food security. One of the things that Simon Maxwell, who used to head the food security unit at the Institute of Global Studies for a long time and has recently been running the Overseas Development Institute for many years, he's just stood down. He worked in food security for a long time. One of the things he used to say was all of this is fine, but it's also got to be about removing the fear that people will not have enough to eat or be able to eat in ways that are appropriate or they would like to. And I think the word security does say something about not being afraid and of being strong and having a sense of being cared for. So I think what's interesting about food sovereignty, for all that has notions of hierarchies and armies and things, and the notion of sovereignty, but it's the other version of sovereignty, of being in control of your own destiny. I think it's part of what this is about. So, to my final points then about what can we do to eat well? How can we begin to find our way through all this? And I don't have a neat answer, but I'm going to try and offer some suggestions. And I think one of them is actually what we're doing today, which is to engage in this issue, to find out and to think and to talk and to do things differently, perhaps. Maybe to change the way we shop a bit, or ask questions when we're shopping, or ask questions about the way our food is produced, maybe to produce it ourselves a bit. So start growing. There's a lot of ground up, bottom up projects like this, not just in Britain, in many parts of the world. We've talked about tables and how important it is to share, also to know about where your food comes from and the sort of politics about it behind. And there's again a lot of work going on about reconnecting people. And also recognising the importance of food and pleasure and trying things out. If you don't have much money, you can't try things out in case you get it wrong, in case the food's inedible and other people can't eat it or won't eat it. You don't have that room for risk and experimentation, which I think is a very important part of eating. And so, for example, as I said, there are lots of these are just pictures from Britain, taken by colleagues, and one on the left is by Laura Davis from Sandwell, and the other two taken by Laura Venn in Somerset, in Bristol's farmers market. So lots of different ways in which people are starting to question that. Is it better to have shorter supply chains? Not always a straightforward answer there about whether that's better for you, but knowing the provenance of your food, how it's produced, as I said. Looking at values for money, talking about that because others are going to. And some argue that it's important that we perhaps support more small-scale, local initiatives, businesses, community food. Others say, oh, this is not going to feed the world, so it's quite an area of tension and controversy. But there is no doubt that by doing that, it makes you ask questions then too, and to think differently about the bigger things. So, by going to a farmer's market, you may then go back to your usual supermarket and start asking more questions. After all, fair trade starting small, of people doing stuff, and then it's moved on to be much bigger and in the mainstream supermarkets. So these things may be economically inefficient and high or low tech, but their aim, as I've said, is often reconnection, a better planet and better health and welfare in the broadest sense. I think, we push on, sorry, it's my fault, I've put these in. I think there is a role for government in here, and I'm just doing a little tiny plug for Torah Defa, which gets on the neck all the time, there's some very kind of serious thinking going on there. And one of the things that's happened out of that Food Matters, there's much going on, but there is something called the Council of Food Policy Advisors. And it's probably, I don't know what's going to happen to it after the election. So it might be a very short-lived group. But anyway, it's asking some really quite challenging questions. And they produced a report, which doesn't show very well here, sorry, it's taken off the net, came out a couple of months ago. And it sort of sounds a bit kind of Ponzi, this vision, but this was an effort to really try and encapsulate some of that stuff I've been talking about, to identify areas where government has to take urgent action or leadership to encourage the desire in people to eat a healthy diet, produce in a healthy environment, thereby creating a viable food system for people who can it. Yeah, well, we need to buy into that. So what does it really mean? Well, one of the things we've been just go back to it. One of the things that one of the things we've been driving for is to get better labelling for sustainability as well as health on food. And Mike was very modest and introduced himself. He led some of that work recently. That's one thing. The second thing is to encourage government through public procurement, that is hospitals, schools, the Army, Air Force, Navy, prisons, to buy food that is produced more soundly. They're not quite yet produced more ethically, but certainly thinking about environment, physical environment at any rate. And the third thing is to encourage more consumptions of fruits and vegetables that are grown in Britain as well as coming from elsewhere. Thanks. Okay, so that's three things I've mentioned. And the fourth thing is where can we find out more? So I've got some more books here to throw at you. So I mentioned Jeff Tansey's and I mentioned Felicity Lawrence. There's some of them might be interesting by Carolyn Steele, who's an architect who writes about cities, global cities. I've mentioned Colin's book already. But I'm a member of something called the Food Ethics Council. I'm going to get paid for this, so I'm not going to get any kind of personal gain. I really believe in what it's trying to do. Trying to ask questions that make us think differently. I've got lots of little things here about the magazine we produce. This is a later version of this, so do take some of those. One of the things we do is produce a regular journal. So we're doing it for a bit, which is often on the web. One last autumn was about waste. I said lots of anxiety and interest in waste. And this one came out in December, very timely of course. Climate change, food and farming after Copenhagen. I have 2 copies to give away. I think one will stay here probably. I don't know if you haven't got one, perhaps you should take the other one to the House of Commons, but maybe not. It's all on the web, you can get all of it on the web. But a couple of other just very quick things to mention that we've been doing in the Food Ethics Council. I'll take the last one first, which is an inquiry into food and fairness. This has been quite a challenging. There's some leaflets here, please take them and look on the website about it. We've had almost like a public inquiry. There's been a group of people invited to sit on a panel who have heard witnesses and also called for information via the post and the internet, which has come in. It's been started in October to look at fair play, fair pay and fair say. So what about inputs and outputs and outcomes, about what people get paid in the whole labour issue, and then thirdly, who participates, whose voice is heard. And the report from that will come out quite shortly. And there have been a number of people. The head of the Gangmasters Licensing Authority was on it, somebody from Chatham House, 2 people from the food industry, British Food Consortium and so on, National Farmers Union, Sustain, Fair Trade Foundation and so on. So a number of different key people have been on that. And then just finally, to mention an ethical toolkit, which is produced. We do a lot of work with businesses. There's a business forum and a lot of discussion. And one of the things that Ben Murphy, one of the founders of the Food Ethics Council, produces a kind of matrix for thinking about food and other things, looking at the philosophical notions of well-being, autonomy and justice. So how do things move towards making different people, animals, environment, you can put whatever you want down the left there, well, to make them free, to give them autonomy, and to make sure they're fairly treated. And on the web, you can see there's a whole sort of toolkit for that, and how you can also use it for shopping. And there's one more slide, which just that's the back of one of the bits of materials that are there on the web. So as it says, next time you face a tricky decision, draw the grid, on the left who and what the decision could affect, and across the top, how, for well-being, autonomy and justice, or welfare, fairly treated. And then you think through what the effect is. It doesn't give you an answer, but it helps you think it through. You can do it in groups, and how you can weighting to different answers. And a couple of reports have come out of that, and the kinds of people I've mentioned. And there's quite interesting work, I know some people have seen this, about different scenarios and what the food system might look like in the future. So the final thing then is maybe we've somehow got to get to a sustainable nutrition. I can just click right down. Sustainable means obtaining healthy food, how do we do it? Means producing and distributing food. This is built. Go right on. Keep going. This is built right on not only what DEFRA has produced through about sustainable food, but a number of other bodies as well. This is written within Britain, but I think it applies globally. And what I'm going to finish with a quote from a colleague who mentioned him earlier in the book I talked about. We need a new agrarianism for four main reasons. First, the world needs agriculture of the enlightened kind, which is designed to feed people and to look after the fabric of the world. And since it requires skill and is complicated, it needs a lot of hands on deck. So the second reason to be agrarian is that low-labour farmer is very risky. Thirdly, farming is the world's biggest employer, and it's a good idea to maintain that. And then finally, if people don't live in the countryside farming, they will live in cities, and cities are already overwhelmed. So that's part of eating well.